Have you ever sat quietly beside a little creek, listening to the water flow, and felt like everything in the world had its own natural order? I have. A peaceful piece of land, a gentle stream, and a life free from scrutiny over grass color, fence, height, or frogs croaking behind the garden. That was until the HOA showed up and brought clipboards, bylaws, and a concrete mixer. You think I'm joking? They actually poured concrete into the creek behind my house and thought nature would obediently accept it. But there's one thing those people never understood. You can find a person, but you can't find the land. You can pour concrete, but you can't stop water. And then the land began to answer back. They say life in the suburbs is the American dream. But let me be clear. It's only a dream until an arrogant HOA shows up and decides they own nature itself. My name is Ray Duncan. I'm 58, a retired welder, and I've lived at the end of Timber Hollow for over 20 years. I don't have much. A modest little house, a garage full of old tools, and a creek that runs along the edge of my backyard. But to me, it's heaven. That creek is the last untouched piece of nature left in this neighborhood. It's not big, not deep, just a winding stream that trickles over gravel and rock, slipping past reeds and weeds. On summer evenings, I'd sit out there on a rusty folding chair, beer in hand, fishing rod resting across my lap. Not to catch fish, Lord knows I never pulled anything bigger than my hand out of that water, but because that was where I found myself again. And then they came. Not a storm, not a thief. Something worse. A new HOA, the so-called community. Association, which had only ever existed across the development, suddenly decided to redraw zoning lines. The boundaries shifted after some closed-door meeting none of us were invited to. And just like that, I woke up one morning under the rule of people with name tags and power granted by clipboards. That morning, I was changing the oil on my truck when Linda Becker appeared. She was the chair of the Community Standards Committee, or as I called her, the Queen of Arrogance. Bleached blonde hair curled like a 1980s infomercial, a pastel pink tracksuit like she'd been out jogging, through her freshly manicured nails said otherwise. She clutched her clipboard like it was the 10 Commandments. "Good morning, Mr. Duncan," she said in a syrupy voice like she was reading a sunscreen ad. "I'm here to discuss a small matter." I wiped my hands on a rag and gave her a look. "If it's about taxes, you've got the wrong guy." "Oh no, not at all." Linda smiled, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "It's just the creek behind your home. It's not authorized." I nearly laughed out loud. "You mean the creek that's been here since my grandpa drove a Ford Model T?" Linda didn't smile back. "It's considered a hazard, breeding insects, posing a drowning risk, causing erosion, and most importantly, it doesn't align with the community's aesthetic." I stared at her like she'd just told me to shoot a deer for breathing. "That's nature, ma'am, not a plastic fountain from a garden catalog." She scribbled something on her clipboard. "I'll need you to submit a property adjustment plan within 14 days, or the HOA may be forced to intervene." I pressed my lips together. I was boiling inside. But all I said was, "You should turn around before I consider adjusting you off this lawn." Linda left. Her expensive perfume lingered in the air like the stench of entitlement. 2 days later, I got my first violation notice taped to my front door with neon blue duct tape, like a blood-stained warning. The charges? Unauthorized landscape element, standing, water hazard, and the best one, attracting invasive species, possibly frogs. I thought it was a joke. I was wrong. A week later, the HOA sent another notice, threatening $100 a day in fines if I didn't bring my property into compliance. I sent them a copy of my land use certificate and the county code book. In black and white, the creek was listed as a protected natural drainage feature. I figured that'd settle it, but Linda, And her league of lawn color inspectors didn't stop there. I didn't know what I was up against. I thought I was just defending a creek, but I was about to enter a war for what's right, for land, and for justice against people who believed a clipboard could outrank nature itself. I thought that if I stayed quiet, didn't engage, didn't stir the pot, the HOA would eventually get bored and leave me alone. I was wrong. Not only did they not back off, they got dirty. It started with cheap ink notices taped to my front door each morning like some new HOA gospel. One day it was uneven grass, the next non-compliant fence angle. Once, they even accused me of failure to clear fallen leaves in a timely manner. I live next to a forest. Leaves fall by the hour, not the day. But that didn't matter, because their real target wasn't leaving. The real target was me. Then came the mailbox. I walked out one morning to find it bent at a 90-degree angle like someone had slugged it with a baseball bat at 2 a.m. I called the police. They wrote a report but flatly said, "Probably just kids messing around." Yeah, organized kids. Less than a week later, a pile of decorative rocks appeared at the head of the creek. Not neatly placed in the garden, but smack in the stream itself, blocking the flow and pushing the water slightly toward the yard, creating a strange new current. I knew the game. Someone was testing how I'd react. I didn't react. I cleared the rocks, and I bought more security cameras. That evening, I caught Linda. Yup, her. Parked in her gleaming white SUV across the street, window cracked, phone in hand snapping shots of my yard like she was on assignment for the FBI. When I stepped outside and stared her dead in the eye, she pretended to check her GPS and drove off. I didn't say a word, but I started writing things down. Every incident, every detail, every dirty little tactic. And one thing I knew for sure. The more fake power someone holds, the easier it is to spot the cracks. Then came the mandatory resident meeting at the community center. I'd never gone to one before. This time I showed up, and I knew exactly why I needed to be there. Linda stood at the podium like she was chairing a Fortune 500 shareholder meeting. Her high-pitched voice echoed, "We have a serious issue at Lot 89. Where an unauthorized body of water poses a threat to community safety." I stood up. "That body of water is a natural drainage creek, clearly marked on zoning maps since 1978. She ignored me like I was dirt on her overpriced shoes. Then she pulled out a thick stack of documents and held them up like courtroom evidence. "We are requiring Mr. Duncan to comply with one of 3 solutions. Fill in the creek. Erect a perimeter fence blocking access to the water. Allow weekly HOA inspections with service fees for the next 12 months. I looked around the room. Some neighbors looked at me, then glanced down. Others nodded along with Linda, maybe out of fear or just plain submission. I stepped forward, squared up with her, and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "You can take those papers and file them in a place where sunlight don't shine." A few stifled laughs broke out in the back row. Linda's face stiffened, but she didn't retreat. She just smiled. That cold, smug smile of someone who thinks they're always right because they've always gotten their way. But something shifted in me that night. Right then I realized this wasn't about a creek anymore. This was a war. Between one ordinary man and people who believe they can rewrite nature's rules with a 3-ring HOA binder. She'd drawn the battle line, and I'd just started digging trenches. I don't remember what day it was. All I remember is the coffee in my hand was still hot, and the sun hadn't yet climbed over the tree line behind the yard. Everything was calm, too calm. And then I heard it. A low, heavy rumble, like someone dragging a battleship up a dirt road. I set my coffee down and stepped onto the back porch. That's when I saw it. A concrete mixer truck, big, gray, moving slowly like a trained elephant, was backing down the narrow strip of land between my house and Old Man Thompson's. In front of it, a guy in a reflective vest and hard hat waved his arms like he was directing a moon landing. I stepped down into the yard, boots sinking into the damp grass. "Hey!" I shouted, voice raspy from shock and anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The vest didn't even look at me. "We're executing an HOA work order, drainage risk mitigation project." I froze. Then I ran. Ran like an old soldier protecting his last trench. But I was too late. The chute dropped. And a second later, thick, gray slurry poured out like lava over my backyard creek, drowning it in slow motion. "Shut it off!" I shouted, voice catching in my throat. "This is private property. I didn't authorize this." The driver shrugged. "Just following the contract." I lunged, slipping in the mud, slamming my hand against the side of the truck and yelling. But they were already done. In less than 5 minutes, the first bend of the stream had vanished beneath a slab nearly 4 inches thick. I stood there, mud on my shirt, scratches bleeding down my arm, lungs burning. My creek was dead. Tiny frogs scattered, trying to escape the cooling sludge. Some didn't make it. They were buried alive, little eyes still open, frozen forever in concrete. Linda stood on the curb, arms crossed, with that smug face like she'd just checkmated me in a game I didn't even know we were playing. I wiped mud from my eyes, looked up, and smiled. Not a smile of joy, the smile of a man who'd just realized his enemy had gone too far. She thought she'd won. But she didn't know she had just triggered what nature had been waiting for. A reckoning. The first rain came just days later. It wasn't much, just a light autumn shower. But to me, it was a test. I sat on the back porch in my old rocking chair, coffee cup in hand, watching the rain fall like a familiar symphony from the sky. But this time, there was no creek to swallow it. I saw the water pool. It slid across the concrete slab like oil on glass, circling with nowhere to go. Then slowly, it began to puddle, filling the low spots in my yard, spilling over the fence into my neighbor's. And that was just a drizzle. The following week brought real rain, and the whole street felt it. Mrs. Jensen's basement flooded, carpet soaked through. Alvarez's front porch needed sandbags to keep the water out. The Henderson boys, canoeing across their front yard, the HOA's response? Same. As always, blame the residents. Letters showed up at every house, citing improper lawn grading, non-compliant personal drainage, failure to maintain the yard. Not a single word about the creek. Not one. But I knew. And I started collecting. I pulled out my old Nikon and wore it around my neck like a retiree hobbyist. I photographed every puddle, every washed-out lawn, every storm drain gushing brown water. I kept a detailed log. Date, time, location, water depth. Who was affected? I launched my drone after every big storm, capturing footage of floodwater swelling like a miniature sea across the neighborhood. No one noticed. They were too busy blaming each other. Mrs. Jensen blamed Alvarez's kids for clogging a drain. The Patels sued the Hendersons for planting flowers against the wind, which they claimed funneled runoff into their yard. The community fractured, the HOA punished, and I just watched and documented. Linda didn't retreat. She doubled down. She appointed herself chair of flood mitigation, issued fines like coupons, imposed new lawn rules, and launched emergency yard inspections, followed by, surprise, more fines. One day she came to my door carrying a folder thick enough to land a plane with. You need to submit a revised landscape drainage plan, effective this month. If not, I cut her off. Do I need to factor in the slab of concrete your people poured onto my land without permission? She blinked, pretended not to hear. Any alteration to current drainage structures is subject to penalty. I smiled. Signed the notice. Made a copy. Filed it in a growing binder labeled "After the Flood." I didn't need to fight back. I just needed patience, because I knew one thing for certain. Water remembers. the land doesn't forgive, and concrete doesn't win against nature. That week, the Weather Service called it the storm of the century. I called it the land's court session. The sky turned to lead, heavy as a wet wool blanket over Timber Hollow. The rain didn't fall. It unleashed, as if the heavens had cracked open in fury. I sat on the back porch, cold coffee in hand, watching the raindrops slam against the tin roof like hammers. Beneath my boots, the grass had turned to sponge, and the old creek, or more accurately, the soulless concrete, scar left by the HOA, lay there, shameless and useless. The water hit it, slapped the cement face, then turned back. No place to go. Within an hour, my backyard was ankle deep. By noon, the entire street was a lake. Mailboxes floated like canoes. Trash bags spun in muddy whirlpools. Storm drains burbled and belched, choking on their own failure. And there, in the middle of the downpour, on the porch across the street, Linda Becker stood, umbrella the size of a patio awning, face cold as sleet. She looked out at the rising water like someone waiting for an explanation, as if reality had betrayed the perfection she believed she'd built. But that was just the start. After only 2 serious storms, the damage was undeniable. Mrs. Jensen stepped out of bed to a squelch, her carpet now a moldy sponge. The Alvarezes, downhill from the rest of us, stacked sandbags from their door to the fence. Down on Maple Drive, the street became a stagnant pond, 2 sedans half submerged, murky water curling around tail lights like lurking sharks. And the HOA? Not one word of accountability. Instead, they opened the excuse playbook wide. Improper lawn mowing causing drainage issues, tree placement disrupting runoff, neglected personal water mitigation systems. The one thing they didn't mention, the buried creek. I said nothing. No emails, no yelling. I documented, Nikon camera around my neck, drone in hand. Every time the rain stopped, I took to the skies. Backyards turned marsh, cracked sidewalks, eroded curbs, silent trickles of water undermining foundations. I filed the images like poker cards, turned each page knowing I was sitting on a ticking bomb made of evidence. What I hadn't expected, though, was that the storm didn't just wreck homes. It shattered the community. Just months ago, families here hosted BBQs, their kids playing in shared yards. Now, Mrs. Jensen accused the Alvarez boys of intentionally clogging drains with soccer balls. The Hendersons filed a complaint against the Patels for flower beds disrupting flow direction. A "Keep Off the Grass" sign popped up in someone's front yard. A tombstone for neighborhood trust. The HOA. They seized the moment. Linda Becker, now badged Director of Flood Response, got to work. More rules, more fines, more inspections. And then one day, I got a letter from the HOA. 3 pages, full of sugar-coated threats. Your property is negatively impacting the neighborhood's drainage system. Please submit a redesign plan within 30 days. I read the final line, sat still. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I knew. They were panicking. I signed the notice. Made 3 copies. 1 to return as requested. 1 for the ever-thickening binder, and 1 I sealed in a stainless steel box buried beneath the old oak in my yard, just in case evidence goes missing. Linda didn't know that every time she came to intimidate me, she handed me another puzzle piece in the blueprint for dismantling her empire, because I didn't need to shout or slam tables. I had what she couldn't buy, the truth. And as I've said before, water remembers. The earth does not forgive, and rain shows no mercy. 3 straight weeks of rain. Not the kind that comes and goes, the kind that lingers, seeps into the ground like oil into a white shirt. Day by day, hour by hour, relentless. I sat on the same old porch chair, listening to the rain fall like the heartbeat of an old beast preparing to strike. And then it began. The first sign, The earth moved. At the Alvarez's place, the retaining wall cracked, a jagged line like lightning down its face. At the Hendersons, the patio sank slightly, pooling water that never dried, only grew. At Mrs. Jensen's, she woke one morning to find her lawn leaning toward the street like a drunk on a tilt. None of them said anything about the creek, but I knew, and I could see in their eyes that they knew too, just didn't dare admit it. Flooding was no longer just about mildew. Now it was about foundations failing, homes shifting, and trust eroding. Each HOA meeting now felt like a mute trial. No applause, no voices of support. Just downcast eyes and whispers too soft for the mic. I showed up, sat in the back, quiet as a shadow, taking notes, observing, collecting. Linda Becker, though, she still didn't get it. Or worse, she did, and just couldn't admit it. That was the real problem. Instead of slowing down and reassessing, she doubled down on control. New rules issued. Any home that contributes to declining community aesthetics would face regular inspections, fines for families with garage foundation degradation, which meant when the land beneath them started to give way, and the creation of yet another long-winded committee, the Landscaping Maintenance and Flood Response Oversight Board, a fancy excuse for legalized snooping. Naturally, my name topped the monitor list. I didn't react. Did one thing. I opened that old filing cabinet in my basement, pulled out a faded green envelope my grandfather once told me about. "Someday you might need this," he'd said. "Don't open it until the land speaks." I opened it. Inside was a legal treasure trove, an officially approved drainage map from 1952, stamped by the county. A 1978 letter from the water department confirming the creek behind my house was a protected natural drainage channel, a state environmental report identifying the stream as a designated preservation watershed zone. It wasn't just a creek, it was a heritage, law, and irrefutable evidence that the HOA had crossed a legal line. But I didn't bring it to the next HOA meeting. I didn't post it on Facebook, didn't call a reporter or grab a megaphone. I made 3 phone calls, County Water Department, reported potential violation of protected drainage, City Environmental Office, raised concern over possible wetlands. Mismanagement.local zoning office requested a hydrological review post-HOA alterations. I didn't even mention the HOA, just provided facts, GPS coordinates, drone photos, satellite images, original maps, and scanned documents. Then I created an anonymous email account, sent the full dossier to 3 local news stations, 2 regional newspapers, 1 Facebook group dedicated to exposing abusive HOAs, and of course, the old HOA forum Linda banned me last year. It took just 3 days to see results. Wednesday afternoon. A white utility truck with a county logo crept down the street like a shark circling prey. Behind it, a city-branded SUV. 2 officials stepped out. One with a clipboard, the other with a surveyor's rig. I invited them in, brewed coffee, told the whole story. No rage, no sarcasm, just the truth. Raw, weighty, undeniable. They spent 4 hours inspecting, measuring slope, sampling soil, scanning concrete depth, cross-checking current versus historic maps. Before they left, one said, "We'll be forwarding this to federal environmental and infrastructure enforcement. There's a strong chance this qualifies as a significant violation of drainage and wetlands code." I nodded. Didn't say a word. But inside I knew. The real storm was coming, not from the sky, but from the law. The first headline broke on the Friday evening news, that time slot every politician dreads. A drone shot from above. The entire Timber Hollow neighborhood submerged in muddy water. The footage panned over flooded homes, bent fences, and half-submerged cars. The anchor's voice was stern. A series of unauthorized alterations to a natural drainage system have caused severe flooding in a residential neighborhood west of the city. They didn't name the HOA, not yet. But everyone who lived here knew where it started and who started it. Monday, I opened my mailbox and found a letter sent by express, sealed with bright red ink. Official notice of investigation from the GAOS, City Environmental Office and Wastewater Management Authority. It was addressed to the HOA, but I knew Linda had seen it before I did. And I knew because that very afternoon, at the community meeting room, once her impenetrable fortress, Linda walked in like someone stripped of armor, frizzy hair, sunken eyes, arms clutching a folder thick as a federal indictment. She slammed it down on the table. "I demand the board be informed. We are being slandered. Someone is trying to sabotage this community." The room was dead silent. Linda scrambled. "For every excuse, the media is lying. The city is corrupt. Residents are irresponsible. There's a coordinated effort to dismantle the HOA." But then the projector flicked on screen appeared a photo of the concrete truck pouring directly into the creek behind my house, time-stamped, overlaid with watershed maps, and bold, red text. "County violation, 1978, protected drainage zone." No one said a word. Even the board members who used to nod along like sheep sat frozen, heads bowed. Linda failed. It was a temporary erosion control measure. We heard we were allowed to. A silver-haired man at the end of the table quietly asked, "Do you have that permission in writing?" Linda stood there. 1 second. 2. Then clenched her lips like she'd just swallowed a stone. She didn't. That night, the second broadcast hit. This time, no sugarcoating. The Timber Hollow HOA board is now under investigation for unauthorized modification of natural waterways in violation of municipal flood regulations with potential civil and criminal consequences. An environmental advocacy group launched a petition demanding restoration of the original creek, compensation to affected residents, and prosecution of involved individuals. I didn't have to sign it. Other residents did that for me, and then the inevitable happened. Wednesday morning, outside the community center, a giant red warning sign appeared like a fire station shield. Code violation under investigation. A convoy of government. Vehicles scattered through the neighborhood. Environmental inspectors, infrastructure engineers, and construction regulators. Workers in hard hats waded through the mud, measuring foundations, inspecting soil, scribbling notes. No HOA fines. No Linda flashing a badge like a sheriff. Now it was the law knocking on doors. And me? Still there. Same chair, same coffee, same Nikon on my lap. Watching, documenting, saying nothing. Reporters asked questions. I smiled. I'm just the guy who lived by an old creek. A week later, red eviction notices were slapped onto 12 homes, including Linda's, unsafe structure, mandatory vacation order. Families packed up in the rain, moving trucks clogged the street, windows filled with stunned, silent faces. Linda. She wasn't seen for a week. When she returned, it was in a battered RV, parked on the edge of the woods, the very plot of land she once dismissed as worthless wilderness. Yes, she once believed she could govern nature with fines and resolutions, but nature doesn't hold meetings, nature doesn't vote, nature waits, and when the day comes, it doesn't knock, it crashes down. People like to say that power never collapses overnight, but in Timber Hollow, it crumbled faster than a foundation eaten out by underground water. After the red tags appeared on house after house, the HOA scrambled to hang on. They called an emergency meeting in the decaying skeleton of the community center, where the smell of mildew overpowered even the strongest air freshener. I was there. Sitting quietly, as always. Linda was too, but this time, no power curls, no sharp-shouldered blazer. Just a tired woman curled at the end of the table trying to sit upright but failing to hide the despair in her eyes. Only 4 board members remained. And the residents? Half had already moved out. The other half sat clutching overdue bills, hollow-eyed from sleepless nights. Everyone in that room knew they didn't come to listen. They came to end it. When the chair read out the final financial report, the room fell silent as a tomb. Estimated legal liability, $2.3 million HOA funds available, negative $18,000 liquid assets, negligible. No one needed further explanation. An elderly man stood up, voice trembling but iron-edged. I motioned to dissolve the HOA, effective immediately. No objections, no hesitant hands. Everyone raised their arms at once beneath the whir of a dying ceiling fan and a curtain of soft rain. Linda opened her mouth to speak, but no one looked at her. The game was over. The next morning, I stepped into the backyard, the first battlefield. Through the smell of wet earth and morning wind, I saw Linda silently hauling boxes from the community center to her car. No one helped. No one said goodbye. It might have been a sad scene, if I were the kind of man who felt pity, but I wasn't. I just looked at her. She looked back. No words were spoken, but her eyes understood one thing. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to sue. I didn't need to strike back with fists. I just had to stand still and let nature do the rest. But the story didn't end there, because after the HOA died, the residents, those who once feared fines, once bowed to bylaws, rose up. They held a meeting, not in the community center, but outside, beside the puddle that used to be a playground. No president, no secretary, just real people asking each other, "How do we fix this place?" I opened the old file, laid out the original maps, the legal records, the letters from my grandfather's time. Everyone went quiet. Then applause. Not out of obligation, but out of hope. The following week, the city approved a budget to restore the natural drainage basin. The project was greenlit. This time, no concrete evidence was involved. We, the residents, did the digging ourselves. Someone brought shovels, someone brought plants, someone hauled river stones to rebuild the creek bed. The same guy who once fined me for grass exceeding HOA height standards? He was now laying moss on the stream bank, smiling like a kid. Linda never came back. She left on a foggy morning, driving her rusted RV out of Timber Hollow. No goodbyes, no farewell, parties. Only a paper taped to her window, no regrets. And then one afternoon, as I watered the plants near the bank, I heard a familiar sound, not from a drain pipe, not from a runoff hose, but from the earth itself. The stream had returned. I knelt, dipping my hand into the cool water. Above me, dragonflies spun lazy loops. A few old frogs had come back. I carved a small sign from rough wood, using my grandfather's pocket knife. Nature always wins. Not to gloat, not to claim credit, just a simple truth the HOA had forgotten. But I never did. 3 months after the HOA collapsed, Timber Hollow was no longer the place that used to make my blood boil every morning. No more idiotic violation slips slapped on doors. No more early morning knocks like the cops were raiding. No more side eyes from self-appointed landscape committees. In their place, I saw life. Kids rode their bikes down the sidewalks, no longer filmed or threatened with reports. Grown-ups threw backyard barbecues, swapping homegrown tomatoes instead of bylaws. Neighbors gathered, not to vote on punishments, but to decide what to plant by the stream. And me? I just sat there, same old rusted chair, cup of coffee in hand, watching the water rush past the smooth stones I had stacked by hand. The stream was alive again, as if it had never been strangled by concrete, and with it, the whole neighborhood. Breathed again. They came and asked what we should name the new stream. I shook my head. No need for a name. This isn't something to label, it's something to respect. So we kept it as it was, unnamed, untamed, just like it had been for 100 years before any HOA ever showed up. Linda Becker? She vanished from the area. Rumor had it she filed for bankruptcy. Some say she lives with a sister out of state. But to Timber Hollow, she's just a shadow receding, someone no one wants to speak of. Her old house, once host to cold meetings and plastered with compliance-required signs, is now a half-swallowed wreck, part buried in mud, part strangled in vines, as if nature was reclaiming what it never truly lost. One day, a boy from the neighborhood, maybe 10 years old, asked me, "Mr. Ray, why didn't you sue her? Get your money back? Make her go to jail?" I looked at the kid, then at the stream babbling behind us, and I answered with the simplest truth I know. Because some things don't need a courtroom. The earth will judge, the water will rule, and time always teaches the clearest lessons. I still keep the binder, full of photos, documents, maps, not for revenge, but to remember. To remember that one day, when someone else thinks concrete makes things cleaner, I can pull it out, not to argue, but to remind them we got it wrong once, and we paid the price. Timber Hollow came back to life, but the lesson still lingers. Not a lesson about HOAs, a lesson about arrogance, about the way people think they can divert streams, bend earth, and impose order on things that existed long before they were born. I look at the wooden sign I carved. Long ago, nature always wins. It's not a warning, it's not a victory cry, it's just the truth. And if you stand still long enough, if you listen close enough, you'll hear it in the frog croaks, in the flowing water, in the whisper of grass swaying in the wind. You can write laws, you can build fences, you can pour concrete across an entire field. But you can't tell the land to be silent, and you can't make the water forget its way home.